Hello, everyone. My name is Amanda Thomas, and I am your Mistress of Ceremonies this evening, and I would love to welcome you to Nerd Night. Yay! I'm so pleased that you all made it over on this side of the river. Some of you, how many of you, this is your first time at a Nerd Night? Oh, we've got a lot of new people. Fantastic. Thank you all for coming. You may or may not know that up until last month, we were hosting this over at the Mission Theater, but they changed their format. So now we are very happy to be here at the Clinton Street Theater. We're going to be, yay! Very pleased. The staff here has been really kind and generous, and very happy to make this our new home. So we are here tonight to talk about what can garbage do for us with Dr. Marco Castaldi, who is out here from the City University of New York. Very pleased that he is out here. And this event is being presented and sponsored by Metro and their Let's Talk Trash campaign. And you may have seen some things about it. We've got the nice banners going on. You'll be hearing more about that, but it's to get people talking about different ways to solve trash-related issues and disposal and those sorts of things. So we're pleased that you're here to find out more about that. I'm going to shut up now and go have a beer and turn it over to somebody who's going to introduce our speaker this evening. Metro Councilor Bob Stacy is a local local councilor for this area, Southwest Southeast Portland and Southwest Portland, and he is very interested in working with waste management issues. And I'd like to welcome Bob Stacy to the stage.
Thanks, Amanda. Thanks very much, and thank all of you for being here tonight. I think you've already seen this is part of our Let's Talk Trash series. Metro is our regional government. We do a lot of things to try to build a great place here in our community. We own and operate 16,000 acres of parks and natural areas. We plan land use and transportation for our future. We also manage solid waste and recycling. And I, along with my colleague, Catherine Harrington, is right over here. Catherine, stand up. Who represents about half of Washington County, are the two council liaisons out of the 7-member council to the solid waste roadmap. We have a big opportunity over the next couple of years to try to figure out how to do a better job of this part of making a great place, finding ways, in addition to putting garbage in a hole in the ground, to make more productive use of the asset value of the things we now throw away, including, I guess, some of the things we recycle, like the other 85% of the plastics. That was a disappointing number for me, too. So we're trying to get you folks ideas and input in a process that we have underway, the solid waste roadmap, that would give us new ways of dealing with disposal more creatively, but avoiding disposal wherever we can. So tonight, you'll hear from Marco Castaldi, who, as you've heard, is a professor at the City University of New York, a chemical engineer. He leads the university's combustion and catalysis laboratory. And his research and that of his colleagues is in how we convert carbon-based materials, garbage, for example, to biomass or synthetic fuel. And in tonight's presentation, we'll be exploring some ideas that he's come across around the country that we might put to work in reducing waste. And then check out oregonmetro.gov/letstalktrash for more information. And tonight's entertainment and information is next. I'll turn it over to you, Professor. Thanks again to all of you for being here. Marco Castaldi.
Thank you very much. Thanks. Well, thanks for the introduction. This is actually very intimidating because not only am I not in a classroom of sleeping students, but you all seem very interested in this. So you'll be listening. So I better be careful. I'm actually very excited to come by when Ken Ray called me and said, you know, Professor Castaldi, he didn't call me any other names at the time. He said, Professor Castaldi, doing something on trash, really looking at different options, and we need some credibility. We want to get some real, I said, just because I'm an Italian from New York doesn't mean I know everything about garbage. He said, no, no, no. He says, you do research. I said, all right, my academic life. So what I'm going to try to convey, I guess, to you is some of the experience that I've come across in learning, really learning about garbage and what to do with it. And sort of one of the things that popped up in my head very early on was, we hear a lot about different types of waste. And we hear about carbon dioxide, CO2, greenhouse gas, need to do something with it. And we hear a lot about nuclear waste, get rid of it, stop it, convert it. And kind of puts it in perspective here. We don't hear too much about municipal solid waste, but if we kind of see where it falls in the spectrum of how much waste there is, it's in between the two. Right? So it's not as much as CO2, but a little bit more than, and from my perspective, I don't think there's enough discussion about it. So my friends and family in New York just think that the waste evaporates, and it doesn't. So let's think about really how we need to manage this problem of what I'd like to call it. And this is the hierarchy of how to manage waste, how to manage our garbage. And this comes from a colleague of mine at the WTERT, Nick Themelis, that we've done some time ago. And early on, the EPA and other regulatory agencies had this hierarchy where they said, reduce, reuse, and recycle is at the top. And then right about this line, they said disposal. So if you couldn't reduce, reuse, or recycle, just dispose of it. We thought, there must be another way. And sure enough, when we started to do some research, so, oh my gosh, wait, there's people separate out organics and compost. And then there were 90 or so combustion facilities extracting energy in the United States, and hundreds in Europe and around the world burning the garbage and getting. And then what we also realized is there's different flavors of landfills. There are dumps where you just throw stuff in, and that's sort of what Staten Island is in New York. And this is still part of New York, but that's what we used to do with it, and they don't like it anymore. And they have now, different types of landfill where a modern landfill that recovers and uses the methane produces energy from it. And these are the ones that new landfills should be made from or made up of. There are modern landfills that have daily alternate cover to prevent waste and garbage and paper and so on and plastics from flying all over the place when the wind blows. But they still produce methane, but they don't capture it and convert it to energy. But at least they're trying to convert the methane, and they flare it, and they burn it to just make CO2 and water. And the CO2 is a less of a greenhouse gas impact than methane. It's also less of a fire hazard. So this is good. And so when we think about what we all should do with our garbage, all the garbage that you will have today, how to manage that? Well, reduce the amount that you use, right? That you generate. Try to reuse, and I'm going to show you some real clever examples of reuse, although it's not very becoming for me, but we'll see. And then, of course, we should recycle everything we can. And if you look at really the environmental impacts, the economic impacts, and this triple R is really at the top. And then if we can have source-separated organics, and this is important, one of the reasons why I do a lot of my research in the thermal and the high temperature arena is because I don't have to worry too much about things living. If it doesn't work, I just heat it up more and it just starts to work. But just burn it, right? But in a living system, apparently they only like a certain temperature. I'm not an expert in this area. They like a certain pH, they like a certain amount of water, and so so if they don't get the right nutrients and they don't get the right conditions, they don't really do what you want them to. So if you have source-separated organics, pure food waste, for example, pure agricultural or yard waste, for example, that's not contaminated with things, let's say, like batteries or plastic. Well, composting is great. And you could get some energy. If you do anaerobic composting without any air, that'll generate some methane. Well, then we can put that to an engine and generate some electricity from it, or some steam and heat something with it. Or we could do anaerobic composting, and that's the normal decay process when, say a tree falls down. So you start to see the extraction of energy from the waste stream. So now let's try to get all the energy we possibly can. And when I talk about, at least today, in a waste to energy, I'm talking about all thermal conversion systems. I'm not just talking about combustion. I'm not just talking about gasification. It's all of those. But it's a high temperature. You might consider anaerobic composting as a waste to energy process. The amount of energy is not so much. So you say, well, it's not really waste to energy. It's sort of like waste to a fertilizer product and some energy. But you could lump it in there. But conventionally speaking, waste to energy generally means combustion facilities. Incinerators is sometimes what they're called. But I'd like to make a very sharp distinction between an incinerator and a waste to energy facility. An incinerator is something that is primarily designed to sort of incinerate or render something sterile, just dispose of it. So for example, a biological hazard like medical waste. This is something that we don't want pathogens to persist in the environment. So we're happy with just trying to sterilize it and incinerate it. And if we don't get any energy out of it, well, that's okay, because we don't want any possibility of anything else. And so, and for example, if you have old weapons facilities that need to just get rid of those weapons, whatever they are, you'll incinerate those, because your primary goal is to just get rid of it and sterilize it and render it benign. That's an incinerator, and they have a purpose. For municipal solid waste, for the garbage that we have, and other types of garbage, for wood garbage and so on, we can extract the energy. And so the combustion system, the design, is very similar to an incinerator, except there's a very purposeful design to extract energy from that hot gas. And that's why it kind of falls into that waste to energy. So we're starting to pull out energy, and here, when you run it through the energy system, you could start to pull out materials. And Prometheus gave us fire. And so that Prometheus gave us fire, we can now do many things, and we could test things in fire and purify things in fire. And one of those processes, when you put garbage through a waste to energy, it takes off all the organics, and it sort of concentrates up a lot of the materials, like the aluminum, and you could have a better chance of extracting those materials. And I'll show you some information and some data. And then, of course, okay, now after you can do these things or do whatever you can, there'll always be some residual. Even out of a waste to energy facility, there's an ash residual that has to go somewhere. It's been tried to be used in roadbeds. In New York, there's actually a boathouse made of waste to energy ash, and it's been there for 30 years. And it was a test to find out if we made buildings out of waste to energy ash, would it damage the environment? So a colleague of ours, Frank Rothel from Stony Brook University, built a boathouse and put it in the Long Island Sound, in the saltwater. And it's been monitoring over the 30 years, and so far there really hasn't been much of an issue. So there's still a residual, and if you can't do something with that residual, well, then you have to dispose of it and send it to landfill. So the idea is, now that I think people are becoming more aware of energy issues, and of course, day in and day out, we're getting more and more aware of environmental issues. We need to start to move up this hierarchy. We can't just do some of it and then send the rest of it at the bottom, maybe we could sort of parse this a little bit better. And, this is not just my idea. So the National Research Council of the National Academies of Science had done a really great study. And they kind of looked at the future, and they kind of looked at the current paradigm and the ideal vision, and here is the source if you want to get a little bit more. But what was very encouraging for me to see, I was not part of this. They didn't ask me to be on this. I think it was that Italian from New York thing. I don't know what it was, but yeah, they didn't ask me. But that's okay, because what they found was stuff that I'm doing anyway. The current paradigm is waste. They call it waste generating chemistry, and this is waste generating processes. And what we have to go to is an atom economy, and I like the way they put it, zero waste, because this is actually very compatible when we try to extract the energy and the materials from garbage. We're moving toward that zero waste. Because what does zero waste really mean? I don't think it means that we're not going to generate any waste. At some point, this shirt will be no good to me. I'm going to have to do something with it. And if I throw it in the landfill, at that point it becomes waste. If I throw it in the landfill, it'll do. But if I could change it or recycle it or get the energy out of it, that's good. So this concept of moving toward the extraction of materials and energy in what they consider an atom economy, what they call zero waste, and that's not the conventional sense that we use, is being thought about in real hard ways. Currently, at the rate that we generate our garbage, there's only two proven methods, and I want to be certain here that I'm talking about proven methods. That's landfills. And right now, it's waste to energy facilities, the combustion facilities. These two systems have a track record of 30 years or more of processing the waste at the rate the consumers, the community, the population generates it. And I could tell you, coming from New York, we had a garbage strike one day. It lasted for about 4 days. I don't know if anybody heard of this, or I know a lot of people come out of the subway and they just think that the garbage always piles up, but not all the time. But this time they didn't take, no one took the, and it piled, and holy cow. I thought the subway stunk before. It was bad. And so you really get a sense of the scale. I don't encourage Metro to not pick up the waste. But if that were to happen, you would see, right, that it doesn't just quite evaporate. And so the two proven methods right now are landfills and waste to energy. And, they're going to coexist. On our way to zero waste, on our way to recycling and reusing and reducing, they're going to coexist for a long time. And so what we have to understand, first of all, is what's the best way to design a landfill? What's the best way to extract the energy from them? And what's the best way to put together a waste to energy facility to get as efficient and useful energy out of it? Here in the United States, we only extract electricity from these waste to energy facilities. And that's not 100% true. There are some facilities that actually use the steam. But when you burn the waste, you generally produce a hot gas, which then gets exchanged with some water along the sides of the walls and some heat exchangers, and it generates a steam. And that steam goes through a steam turbine to generate electricity. But not all of that steam that you generate makes electricity. Some of it still is hot steam coming out the back end. And unfortunately, because of the location of many of the combustion facilities, they're in remote areas or far enough away that it doesn't make sense to send the steam to another place to be used. In Europe, because things are more condensed and because the population, quite frankly, is much more accepting of waste to energy, and there's a landfill ban in place where the landfill ban says you cannot send organic material to a landfill. You cannot send material that has an calorific value to a landfill, that they send a lot of their material to waste to energy facilities. And because they're located in dense areas, they could use their steam quite efficiently. So they get about double the amount of energy from their waste. So this is something to think about in terms of if you were to send your garbage to a combustion facility, you would want to look to see, yes, the electricity could be routed to many different places, but could there be a place where you could site it, where you could send that steam, heat city buildings, for example, heat a greenhouse. If I'm not mistaken, in Minnesota, the waste to energy facility there routes their steam to the ballpark and heats the grass underneath it. So this way it kind of keeps it alive during the winters. Now, one of the big issues when we talk about garbage and what to do with it is the environmental impact of things. And when we look thinking about the environmental impact, we're thinking about a lot of different things, which I'll go through in a minute, but one of the big things that pops up is renewable energy. And shouldn't we be moving more toward renewable energy? Well, absolutely. And wind and solar and hydro are definitely geothermal. These are ways to go. But I put this slide up here because it's proven scientifically that the garbage that we generate is about 2/3 renewable energy. Paper that we throw away, some of the organics that get in there, are derived from biological sources. And we generally don't like the EPA because they make a lot of mistakes and they don't like it when we correct them. But that's okay. We still like to talk with them once in a while. And we were happy to see that they put together an estimate of the waste stream, and they characterized it for the different materials that would go in. And they said these would be biomass components and these would be petrochemical. And they estimated that in general across the United States, about 70% is of biological or biomass-based renewable, and about 15% is fossil-based. Well, we've had a history of not really believing them. And being in academia, this is some of the things that we do. We check what others do. And we said, let's check. So we didn't want to go out there and pick the garbage, although we have a lot of students to do that. They don't like it if they find out what the real project is. And so we said, there's other ways to do it. There's other more scientific ways to do it. And one is radiocarbon dating, counting the carbon-14 content of the carbon dioxide that comes out of a combustion facility. And this is the same process that's used when places try to date fossils and date ancient artifacts using carbon-14 dating. It's the exact same process. It's actually a company of Beta Analytics. And what was done is we had done an initial test where we tested Beta Analytics. We made some samples and said, yeah, you think you can do this? Tell us how much biocarbon is in this sample, and this sample. And of course, we knew because we made the sample. And they came back and they hit the number exactly. It was pretty good. So now their process, their methodology has been incorporated into an ASTM standard, American Standard Testing Methodology, D8666 and so on. And so now there's a protocol that if a facility wants to get carbon credits, for example, they can capture their gases, send them to Beta Analytics. So it'll go through the ASTM standard, and they'll say, oh, these samples that were taken from this time to this time, and if you prove to us that that was the same stream coming in, had this amount of biomass carbon content, so you'll get those carbon credits. So it is possible to take a look and really figure out what the exact biomass carbon. But what's nice is this, we measured this at 66%, and this was a grab sample of a Covanta combustion facility where they voluntarily grabbed the flue gas and put it in a bag and sent it down there and got it tested, and those 3 samples came up at 66, 68, and 66%. And we were happy to see that it was actually pretty close to the estimate. So in general, what that means is these estimates of waste being generated are fairly accurate. And I could show you some data that around the world, although we think we're very different from so many places, I mean, I wouldn't think that Portland thinks they're the same as New Yorkers, and I know New Yorkers don't think they're the same as Portland, primarily because you have trees here. That's why. The waste composition is fairly consistent. So, we could kind of use these as guidelines. Importantly, what we have found, and we can discuss this at the end, is that it's about a 10 to 30% reduction of carbon dioxide emissions compared to landfills. And this is because there's the offset. As you're generating the energy, you don't have to burn another type of fuel to generate that electricity or energy that you need. So then there's also the question of, well, what's in those fossil fuels and what else is in there? And a big one is the plastics. And one of the questions that came up for your trivia was how much of the plastics that are collected go to recycle. And this was something that really, I give my colleague Nick Themelis a lot of credit, because he had done a study, and this was his study that he had done, where he looked at the waste stream, and he really had a student follow the waste stream. It was amazing. And the students, when they come in with the curiosity and the open-mindedness and really want to understand something, you'd be amazed at what they do. I'll tell you another disgusting story in a little bit. But this one isn't so disgusting, because this student followed the waste stream and followed, here are the separated plastics, and it went over to a recovery facility, and the material was processed, and some of the plastics, seemed to go off and get sold, and other plastic, about 80% of it, was baled up and sent to a landfill. And look, this can't be. Try another one. Sure enough, and that was the general case. And a lot of reasons why. We didn't dig into the reasons why too much, but we primarily told the mayor of New York City, stop recycling. What, out of your mind? Yes, stop recycling, because you're wasting more energy by collecting it all on a different stream and sending it to a landfill when it could have went there in the first place. And sure enough, New York City stopped it. And I remember Themelis, thank God I was new to the university at that time, he took all the credit, if you will, and took all the heat. And it was, but the recycle program was reinitiated in a more thoughtful way to say only these types of plastics are the ones we want. The rest of them, unfortunately, there's no market, it's too much energy, so on and so on. They're going to waste. But if you think about plastics and what they're made from fossil fuel primarily, and there's a lot of energy. So if you look at the different types of fuels that are available to us, natural gas and oil and coal and wood, and how much energy there is in each one, non-recycled, so these are the plastics after recycling has been done, what's left over, there's more energy than coal. And so now if you think about this, you've extracted the fossil material and the other materials to make this plastic. You've made the plastic, it's had its useful life, like this pointer. It's had its useful life. And now the question, what to do with it? Well, I mean, I guess we can make a flower pot out of it. It's kind of small, but that's okay. Or you could get the energy out of that. And so you've sort of given that fossil material 2 lives, right? The one for the pointer or the cup or the plastic bottle, and then you've taken the energy out of it, and you've prevented or offset more fuel from being extracted. So what is a waste to energy facility? Well, this is a typical waste energy plant. And the way it works is the garbage truck that comes along your curb and picks up the garbage dumps the garbage directly into a pit. Now, it doesn't have to be that way. It can go to a transfer station, and then, a larger truck, to get economies of scale and efficiencies, could dump it there. But there are many places that those individual trucks come in and dump the garbage into a pit. And importantly, that garbage then just gets directly picked up by a crane, moved over, and thrown into a hopper. And this hopper basically just keeps a set of garbage or fuel, ready to go in, and then it gets pushed in to a grate where this is sort of like not quite a barbecue grate, but something like a barbecue grate, where the garbage, because it's big bags and so on, sits on this grate and doesn't fall through it right away, of course, and air comes up from the bottom and catches fire. And this is where the primary combustion zone is. And it converts the garbage to carbon dioxide and water and other emissions, which we'll get to. And that hot gas then starts to go around these different passes where it extracts some energy from here in terms of heating up water. That water then gets converted to steam and then goes through these pipes as the gas rubs past here, converts more of that heat into the steam, then comes through again into these economizers. So there's 1, 2, 3 passes of this hot flue gas where the energy and the heat is being extracted to generate steam to then go to that steam turbine. And then the gases come out and they go through scrubbers to take out some of the hydrochloric acid and the sulfur in the material. And then they go through a bag house to collect dust and particulate matter and other heavy metals or electrostatic precipitators. And then finally, of course, all of the emissions are being monitored and it goes out the stack. And down at the bottom, you get ash that comes out, and that's the residual that's left over. And in general, you have about a 90% reduction in volume from the waste that you produce to the ash that finally comes out. And it's about a 70% reduction in mass. So here are the emissions. So we spoke about some of the emissions like the acid gas, and this just gives you a little bit of a sense of the types of emissions that are generated from a waste to energy facility. This is the dust of the particulate matter, SOx or the sulfur, the NOx, the hydrochloric CO, heavy metals like mercury, and these are more. This is just an example. And what we like to kind of compare how the average of 10 waste to energy facilities in the United States are operating, we like to compare them in academia to sort of the most stringent standards, the most rigorous regulations that are in the world. Because we look at it and say, yes, of course, different localities and different regulating bodies have different reasons why they might want to have different numbers. But from sort of a scientific perspective, if one place can do it, why can't other places do it? And why shouldn't we try to get the lowest emissions or the highest stringent regulations? So right now in the world, the European Union has the toughest standards to meet the emissions. And what we can see is the percent of the emissions, the emissions that come out compared to the standard are well below, except for NOx and chlorine. And we can discuss why. But importantly, they're about half, if you will, or a quarter below the standards that are set. And these are hard to get lower because the NOx, well, that nitrogen comes from the air. And you need the air for the combustion. So that's tough. And the chlorine, well, that comes in with the garbage. There's chlorine in food, i.e. salt. There's some chlorine in plastics that come into the waste stream and so on. So really the only way to try to minimize these is to sort of take out those chemicals, and that's hard. But the point is that there are emissions that are generated and they're well below the standards. Now I put up another one that I think is very close to you guys, not only in proximity. Even though I'm from New York, I know the states and the locations west of the Hudson. So Enerchem is located in Edmonton. I know that's in Canada. I know. Okay. Alberta, Canada. How about that? And why do I bring this up? Because they have what I consider an excellent waste management program. They have 60% diversion. They have all of the components in that hierarchy. Of course, they encourage reduction. Of course, they encourage reuse. The citizens that don't reduce or reuse comes into the facility in Edmonton, and they start to separate. And they have a huge recycling program, paper, plastics, glass, and so on. They take them out before it goes through any other process, so it has a nice high quality to it. But then there's residuals there. They take out the organics, they send it to a composting facility, and they're thinking about what to do with that compost material afterward, but they're composting it. And then again, they still have this residual that they have left over, and that's when they said, okay, what to do with the residual? And they've selected a company called Enerchem, because Enerchem is a gasification process where we can talk about it quickly, but the waste residual that's left over from the Edmonton sorting process basically gets gasified, and those gases try to get converted and cleaned to make different types of final products. So not just making heat and electricity or steam and electricity, but they're trying to make ethanol with this. And so here's a process where they're doing all of the different hierarchical processes, and they still have that residual. Instead of sending that just directly to the landfill or pelletizing it or trying to make a chair out of it, they're basically trying to make ethanol out of it. And the size of what they do is comparable, although it's a little bit smaller than Portland, but it could work. Another gasification, so importantly, this gasification process utilizes the material after it goes through a sorting system, which is complicated but can be done. Another gasification process called thermoselect is operational, where the thermoselect process works the same way the waste to energy facility does, where it collects the garbage right from a pit, takes the crane, puts the garbage into a hopper, and then that garbage goes through what they call a degassing channel, and then it gets gasified, and then it gets cleaned. And what they're trying to do with that synthesis gas is make things like methanol, and they're trying to extract the sulfur elements and the zinc elements. They're trying to get the metals and minerals. And here's that thermal treatment process. For Enerchem, here's that thermal treatment process, gasification. For the combustion facility, here's that thermal treatment. So I think you get the theme. There's a thermal treatment process, okay? And any thermal treatment process will yield an emission, an unwanted emission that must be dealt with. So if you look, there's the gas cleaning. Here's the gas cleaning. Here's the thermal process, gas cleaning. And this is just a comparison to show a modern, great energy from waste facility against different gasification processes. And you see in the categories of emissions, they all have them to differing levels. So when we think about what to do with this waste and how to convert it, we basically have to think about what other pieces need to be put on that to meet those environmental standards like the EU emission standards. And if you're going to deal with the thermal conversion system, you must treat the emissions. They may be in a different form and a different amount, but they will be treated. Like your car, and I know Portland, you guys don't drive a lot of cars, you ride a lot of bikes. That's great. That's great. I had a bike in New York. It was taken by someone else. So I drive now. They don't like my car. But even in your car, you have a gas treatment system. It's called a catalytic converter. There's a thermal process which yields an emission. So can't separate those two. And it just, how do we engineer and design it? Now, in terms of emissions, the sort of big boogeyman in the room is dioxin. And we had a question about the fireworks. And this is great. And this is my rendition of a graph that should make sense. I hope it makes sense to you. But what we're looking at here is the amount of emissions. No, I'm sorry, stop. What we're looking at here is 100 years of waste-to-energy plant operation. Okay, so this is seconds, if you will. And this is the size of the time of operation. And if we wanted to have the same emissions that a waste-to-energy plant produces in 100 years of operation on a timeline, and compare that to the amount of emissions that you get from fireworks, which normally don't go on for 100 years, that timeline would look like this. This is a study done in the UK, and I have the reference somewhere. So these dioxins, they're a problem. But the combustion facility is not the problem. It doesn't mean it's not producing them. It's producing it at a far lower rate than what I think a lot of us are exposed to in other aspects of our lives. Here's another way to look at this. Here's the background concentration of dioxins. Because it comes from lightning, it comes from forest fires, it comes from people burning garbage in their yard, it comes from agriculture burning the agricultural waste in an open field. And this would be the background concentration. And in 1990, this would have been sort of the concentration from the waste-to-energy facilities in operation in the United States. But here it is in 2000, and the last set of measurements that I have in 2009. So if you compare sort of the amount of dioxin emissions coming from the waste-to-energy facility in the United States compared to the background, it's a small dot. Doesn't mean it's not there. It just means if you think about what you're really exposed to, it's actually some things that we have no control over. Now, another question on that test, which I guess I'm glad I didn't take because I didn't get them all right, was recycling. So here is a survey that we've been doing for a while when I was at Columbia University with my colleagues at the Earth Engineering Center. Now I'm at the City College at the Earth Engineering Center. But when we first started, we looked across all different countries. And what we're looking at is, which countries do recycling, that's the purple. A lot of countries do composting and a significant amount of it. And of course then, what do you do with the rest of the waste? Well, you landfill it. And what you can see in general is countries that tend to have more recycling and composting tend to have more waste to energy. And that's not only countrywide. I'm sorry you can't see this, and I was told that you couldn't see this, and I was told to fix it. And like any other good student, I did not listen. Because the point of this picture is to kind of just look at the colors. Again, we've got recycling, we've got waste to energy, and we've got landfilling. What's sort of weird or bad is that if you look at the amount of landfilling in the United States, in the United Kingdom, this is about where we fit, okay? And then if you look in terms of states, this just shows the different states. And again, you see the states that, have a little bit more waste to energy. What you see is that waste to energy is cutting into the landfill. It's not cutting into the recycling. In general, that's the case. Of course, right there. You guys are high up there. You're not as high as New York. That's what you didn't know. But somebody asked, where's Oregon? I didn't. Oh, look at Connecticut. All right, that's the spirit. Plus you got more trees. I like nature. It's great. As long as I don't have to deal with it. All right. So we looked at those types of things. So now what about materials recovery? We spoke about energy, okay, and we looked at recycling and so on. But what about materials recovery? And this just sort of gives an idea. And we could look at the numbers if you want. As an engineer, you have to have numbers, 439,868. But, sort of the pie charts are really kind of nice to look at. And what you see is that ferrous, iron-type materials recovered versus landfill at mass burn. So this is ferrous recovered, and this is ferrous landfilled. And what you see is we're basically burying about 50% of material because we're sending it to landfill. When you look at non-ferrous, zinc, and these types of things, we're sending even more to landfill. Now, there's a type of material called a critical material. And I don't know if anybody's heard of critical materials, but critical materials are things like gadolinium, molybdenum, and other types. We could talk about other ones, selenium. And they go into the electronics. And you need small amounts of these. Thank God we need small amounts of these because there's only small amounts in the earth. And there are certain sources where you can get them from. But because of the proliferation of portable electronics and the types of these critical materials, that resource is getting lower and lower. So there's a lot of that in the waste. In Germany, many, many years ago, put into place waste-to-energy facilities, incinerators, and they realized that coming out of that process, you're concentrating up the material into this ash. They said, aha, there's not a market yet. It's too expensive, and we got a heck of a lot of whatever kind of chemicals they had. They said, well, maybe one day. And what they do is they take that ash and they put it into a separate landfill called a monofill. And they didn't contaminate it. They would only let a certain amount of ash go in one monofill, a certain type of ash, fly ash or bottom ash, go into another monofill. They said, because one day we might have to go back in and go get, and sure enough, that's what they're doing now. They're going back into the monofill. Why? Because the materials now are very expensive. Now it's economically worth it. But boy, talk about foresight. And there's monofills here in the United States that do that. I think they do that because they saw Germany doing it. I don't know why, but well, yeah, the Germans are doing it, let's do it, must be smart. In terms of other types of materials that could be extracted, and this is something that we're now currently doing research on. So there's your 3,400 tons of aluminum. That's in one facility in Sweden. And these are some of the other ones. Neodymium, which is a critical material. Scandium is a critical material. These are the types, yttrium, that people are starting to go after. And you kind of get an idea. If you just kind of divide by 1,000 here, you get tons. But what I want to point out over here is we all know gold, and gold is very expensive. And if you look at taking gold out of the ground, and you look at the concentration of gold in the rock ore that's taken out of the ground and processed to make our jewelry and other gold things that we have, there's about 3 grams of gold in every ton of rock that's mined. And that is economical, because we buy the gold, for material processors and smelters and companies to extract those 3 grams of gold per ton to make. And if you look at ash, it could be anywhere from 10 to almost 50 times more of gold in the ash. So if it's economical to extract it from the ore, why isn't it economical to extract from the ash? I don't know. So I said we're doing research on that. Okay. So the extraction of value from wastes, we looked at this in a hard way in many different aspects. And you have to look at all different types of sustainable categories. And I just put up a couple here. I mean, we spoke about energy, we spoke about the climate, and we spoke about the environment. Health. Got to get rid of the waste, right? I mean, that's part of the problem. If you don't process your waste, it causes things like disease. And so you got to get rid of the waste. But, like I say, it's counterintuitive sometimes to try to extract these materials in facilities that maybe we don't all understand. And when we first saw the data of why these municipalities would have higher recycling rates when they were using waste to energy, and some of them were using gasification. They weren't all using combustion, although the large majority is using combustion mass burn facilities. That is the most reliable systems that have reference plants that can be demonstrated for many, many years of operation, continuous operation. But we thought that's kind of counterintuitive. I thought, we had it taken away. And we don't know, but we think it's because municipalities and communities that think about all possible options are open to also new technologies on recycle and think about ways, how can we get that recycling? How can we get that better? And okay, now after we've kind of gotten everything we can out of it, let's just get the energy out. That's all we can get, we'll take that. And this is why they're sort of looking at all those options. And so, extracting value from wastes is sustainable. It's also economically sustainable, in certain areas. I mean, all recycling is not economically sustainable because if you don't have a market for it, where are you going to sell it? So we did a survey because one of the biggest things that we get in New York City is a complete oblivion to waste processing. New Yorker disappears, right? New Yorkers walking down Fifth Avenue. Waste, what are you talking? Get rid of it. Go away. I don't know, subway, goes in a subway. Yeah, I don't take the subway. No idea. So we did a survey where we had about 400 respondents, and they told us that was a 95% confidence level with a plus or minus 5 to 5.1 error margin of error. And we had to go through like dealing with human subjects. Think about this. I have to make a diversion for a minute here. We're professors. We're putting together a survey, and in order to put together the survey, we had to go through training for dealing with human subjects. I said to them, we ask student questions every day, and I never had this training. Why now, when I'm just going to put it on a piece of, they're like, you got to deal with human subjects, you got to take this training. So I made sure that we didn't treat them unfairly. So we asked them, and we asked them their highest education level, and this was in New York City. We asked them that, and so here's how it broke out. Where do you think your trash goes after you throw it away? About 30% is not sure. That's sort of sad. Taken to a landfill outside the state, 33%. That's pretty good. Taken to a landfill inside my state, these are more right, but basically going to a landfill. Taken to a waste to energy facility, 2.5%. That shows to me they're unaware. This gives you the local perspective of New Yorkers. There's a waste to energy facility across the Hudson River in New Jersey that their garbage goes to. They're like, yeah, that's over in California, right? We're like, no, right there, like you could see it. They're like, that's not ours. Like, okay, so they don't even know. When you hear waste to energy, do you feel positive? And holy cow, 70%. This, to me, was amazing because I can tell you in New York, if you mention the words waste to energy, they throw things first and ask where you're from later. And here, in just this kind of questionnaire, and only about 6% were negative toward it. True or false? Waste energy technology is considered a renewable energy in New York State. 70% said yes. No, it isn't. Which option do you think produces more greenhouse gases? Holy, they got that right. That's true. So that's pretty good. Given what you know about waste to energy and landfilling, where would you prefer your trash to go? 88%, here's the key. Because I guess they don't realize where New Jersey is. To a local waste to energy facility. So that's pretty good. But importantly, and then other. Somebody actually said other. And they wrote in the comments, Give it to New Jersey. I'm not kidding you. We're like, they got it. All right. Do you think New York City handles its solid waste in a responsible, sustainable way? 50% are unsure. 30%, only 10 or 11% say yes. So to kind of close out, I just want to sort of put things in perspective. I'm not a proponent of any one method of waste management. I'm a proponent of all of them. But we have to think about what we're doing. So in the bad old days, this was not such a modern landfill. And I can tell you, these exist. Importantly, these exist today, currently, in most of the world. And it is tough to look at because that is not good. Now, a modern landfill, very different. There's a liner, it's layered properly, alternate daily cover, don't have the stuff flowing around it, collect the gas, send the gas to make a modern. That costs money. But if it's done right, it's sustainable, it's done environmentally. It's the same thing with, this is actually from New York. This is one of the first New York ones. See, there's a little air flue there to just make sure there's not too much air going. They didn't want to burn it too well. Whoops, and then everything kind of just. So, there was time when they just wanted to reduce the amount of mass that they had to deal with, the incinerators. And here are combustion facilities today. There's New York. Nice. This is Splitterlau in Vienna. You have to pay to go inside and see it. You want a tour, you pay an admission. My student tried to give me the receipt for reimbursement. I said, did you learn something? Yeah, I said, that's your tuition. In Denmark, the idea is have it be transparent. Okay, so, these things. Well, what else could you do with your waste? And this is this wouldn't be fitting for me, which is what I said before. But there are people that waste does not exist, only wasted making clothes. That's a dress. That's a garbage bag. That's more dresses and shoes. Those are cans. I don't know what that is, but it's a recycle runway. So there are many things you can get from your garbage, and I suggest we keep trying.
Thank you, Marco. It's time for Q&A now. We will have this microphone out in the audience. If you have a question, please raise your hand. So do you know anything about the plant specifically that's in Oregon, the one in Brooks?
I mean, I know it's a Covanta facility.
Yeah, can you talk a little bit about it, or do you have any specifics on that one?
Well, I mean, it's a conventional mass burn facility that's been in operation for some time. It's very similar to this one here. I think the big difference is that it uses the trash gets brought to it from one of the transfer stations, so the little garbage trucks don't go there. But it's what I would consider the conventional mass burn facilities that have been in operation for the past 30 years. It uses state-of-the-art emissions control technology to meet all of the regulations and so on. And it's this is what would be considered a reference plant. So if citizens were interested to say, oh, I want to build one where I am, let me go see one, you'd want to go see that. Brooks?
Okay, so I'm glad you came back to this because in your description of the waste energy plant, you have an option for urea injection. I was wondering if you can elaborate on that step.
Sure. You don't pee in it. You can, I just wouldn't amount to anything. So what happens in these combustion facilities is one of the ways to get rid of emissions, one of the ways to reduce the emissions is to put an additive in. And urea is basically a hydrogen source. It's a source of hydrogen that you could bring in, and you spray it in the combustion area, and that serves to reduce NOx emissions. And there's a reaction that occurs. The combustion produces NOx combined with the urea makes N2, which is nitrogen gas, which is the gas that we have in the air, and then water. So it basically reduces it. So one way to get rid of emissions is to add something. And so that's adding a chemical, which what people are thinking about doing today is in diesel trucks today, they're already doing it. So so this is what, this is done on a large scale, and this has been done for years and years and years, and I could get into the chemistry of it. But carbon injection, so the ways to get rid of, let's say, mercury or heavy metals that get volatilized in there, you spray in carbon, and that carbon captures the metal. Now that metal, it doesn't go away, it's on that carbon particle, but then that carbon particle gets caught up in the baghouse, and so instead of going out the flue gas, it comes out with the baghouse residual, if you will. So they spray in carbon, and then the acid gas scrubber, sometimes they spray things in, sometimes they don't, but sometimes they also put in calcium hydroxide to also reduce chlorine.
I have a two-part question. Portland and Oregon itself has a lot of green grass, that's the wrong word, but forest byproducts. Is it cheaper to recycle and waste energy forest byproducts and yard clippings and sticks and leaves than it is obviously landfill? That's my first question. I know it's long, sorry.
So is it cheaper to recycle
To make that a waste to energy form, separating just forest byproducts, limbs, branches, trees, bark?
I'd have to think about the costs. I think in general, if you could have a pure stream of forest byproducts, grass, limbs, trees, and so on, you're probably better off trying to compost that. That would, if you can keep it pure, that would probably be the cheapest and best way to do it. To put it into a combustion facility, it's wet, so that would actually maybe cause it a little bit of problem. So you would not want to put that all in by itself.
We have an unlimited resource. That's why I was just thinking and also trash, but it just seems like that would be a logical solution for a waste to energy, a cheaper form and a more eco-friendly per se.
So and the key words that I used there was if you can keep it in a pure form. So once that gets contaminated, now you're going to have trouble composting it and doing something with that compost. So just think about if that stream is contaminated with a couple of batteries. Let's just say a couple of batteries. Are you going to take that compost and put it on your tomato garden? I mean, I don't think I would. So now it kind of gets contaminated. So now it pays to then send it to a combustion facility to get the energy out of it. So the key there in composting type things is that it has to be pure. Otherwise, the final use of that material or that compost residual is very, very limited, and people are very, very skeptical. Yeah. Wood has a very high value, energy content, and if you can't do something like that because it might be contaminated with paint or is treated somehow, you're better off burning it.
Hi, my question is, what is much more better, doing composting in a small community type environment or taking it out to a waste to energy plant? Because I'm trying to do it in my community, and earn some carbon points. So which one is better?
I think it would be, it's a good question. And I'm not sure if there's just a straight up answer, this is better or that's better. I think it depends on the scale of the operation. You know, if you have a small scale operation, we can talk about what small scale means, but you know, like one community, composting would work. Again, if it's properly separated and kept, you know, uncontaminated from plastics and other types of garbage and contaminants. On a small scale, composting is probably better because the composter could be made at a reasonable size for a reasonable cost, and you'd get a usable product out of it. And it would be too small, you know, you'd pay a lot in transportation costs to send over to a waste energy facility. But if you have a whole bunch of it, composters have problems when they get very, very large. And so it's a scale issue is, I think, really, and of course, again, a contamination issue.
Hi, I'm just wondering, how are typically these waste to energy plants powered? And are the output numbers that you gave kind of, are they net numbers or are they?
That's a good question. Okay, so they are powered by the garbage. So there's no external power. Now what happens is, to start it up, of course everything's cold, so they just put in some fuel, and they might run that fuel for one day. But then once it's started, it runs continuously just with the garbage. There's no additional fuel that's put in there. It's powered by itself. And the typical numbers that I show in terms of, let's say, efficiency, they're about anywhere from 18 to 23% efficient. And that's net, that's complete. So that's the amount of electricity that you get out from the garbage that you put in. Yep.
I had a updated piece of data for Oregon. We actually recovered 22% of our plastics last year. So it's not that impressive, but it's a little more impressive than what you had on your
Okay.
slide there. The question I had was, obviously the information you presented today is very advantageous for waste to energy facilities. My question to you is, has the research that you've done at the City College of New York been funded through some of these facilities?
Okay. So two things. One is, I guess I did not want this presentation to come off as advantageous for anything. I wanted this presentation to come off as a piece of information. And I want the message to be obtained from, I want the message to be what could be obtained from waste. And I think a lot of people know about recycling, reuse, and reducing. This has been in our vernacular for 40 years. I think people get it when you say you can make a dress out of it. I don't know who the hell would buy it, but you could do it. So I thought that the thermal aspect of things was maybe less known, okay? Plus, that's my expertise in high temperature. So that was the message that I wanted. And you know, whether that be combustion, plasma, gasification, pyrolysis, that's what it is. So has it been funded? Yeah, I mean, I'm funded by the National Science Foundation. I've been funded by the Electric Power Research Institute, EPRI, and then we've been funded by the Waste to Energy Research and Technology Council, which is a consortium of consulting companies and waste to energy facilities, as well as the American Chemistry Council. So we get funding from a number of different sources. Does that answer your question? Sure, sure.
Hi, thank you. I have a question about, I guess, the context of, you know, a system like this within, like, for example, the Portland area where we have, you know, a recycling program that's already going. And I guess, you know, recycling, if you wanted to, like, compare waste to energy to recycling, it's my understanding that you get, like, if you had two pieces of plastic and one you recycled and when you took waste to energy, you'd get, it's environmentally preferable from an energy perspective to recycle that piece of plastic. So I guess my question is, it's my understanding that once you site a facility for a particular amount of waste coming from a community, that then it kind of requires that amount of throughput, of material. And so you kind of, it requires that to keep it going like economically. And so you kind of lose the incentive to improve the recycling within a community. So I don't know if you have any experience, that you can speak to that at all.
Sure. I mean, I could give you my comments on that. I mean, you're right that that takes us all the way back to the hierarchy. Recycling is preferable, no doubt. I mean, waste to energy was lower in that hierarchy, so you're 100% correct. There's a certain number of times things could be recycled, and the recycling presumes you have a market. So that's important, okay? So then, right, in terms of now building it, you're right, you want to build it, and then you build it for a design amount of material that you have coming in, and of course, you want to maintain that material. My experience has been so far in the United States that expansions have been occurring. And why have expansions been occurring? There's a number of reasons. People are generating more garbage, but a lot of that expansion is eating into the landfilling. And so, will there come a day when there's no more landfilling, and then those facilities that are sited need to be shut down? There might. If you look at a projection of waste being generated, okay, and then you look at, sort of maintaining recycle rates, it's an assumption, that with the current recycling rates that we have, that's that difference, that if the growth of waste to energy facilities, if we built more waste to energy facilities at the current rate it's been growing, like one every 10 years, that we'll still be sending stuff to landfill. If we increase the production of waste to energy plants by 5%, it's not until we get to the 5 or 7% of, and that's a lot. So there's, again, I show this and I show this, that can there come a day when we don't have any waste to go to a facility? Yeah, but I think there's a huge amount of room for that, because right now, as we see, it cuts into the landfilling. And so when that's gone, then you're right. Now, there is a facility in Denmark that is importing their waste. So they built a facility. Their recycling had increased, their reduction had gotten better, and so the facility needed waste. The neighboring countries around, I think it's Norway, sending their waste over there. So I'm not sure if that answers your question. That's the comment, I guess. I think it would be a long time, but depends on the size of the facility and how much goes there, yeah.
I'm wondering about getting more resources back from what we're wasting now, human bodies and oil spills. And I'm thinking more use of mushrooms to take out some of the heavy metals or toxicity, and then recycling into food, et cetera. And I'm thinking about cremated bodies with all these heavy metals and poisons that a human body is like a toxic waste dump. But if we can get things back to make more cell phones or whatever it is, I'd like to learn more.
Well, so let me say that I think what needs to be thought about, and again, I don't want the message to be that, waste energy is the solution. I want the message to be that we have to look across all possible processes and paths. But importantly, we have to look at them in the scale that they can be deployed in. So, the mushrooms to extract metals and then be held there and do something with it. Just think about the rate that they can grow and extract and how many bodies are piling up or not. So if they grow at the scale, at the rate that the bodies are dying, it's all good. If the bodies are dying faster than the mushrooms can extract, they'll pile up.
Thank you. I was wondering, do you know if companies and manufacturers are getting any incentives to increase the amount of recyclable materials that they're using rather than, materials that would have to go to landfills or waste to energy?
That's a tough one. Okay, so I don't, the short answer is I don't know like of specific incentives and drivers and subsidies or anything like this. What I do know is there's a huge conversation going on about, producer or manufacturer responsibility. And I know that just from my experience, really, just say in the last 15 years of my industrial experience, I worked in industry for about 8-9 years before going into academia, that there was a time when corporate responsibility, corporate sustainability was a buzzword. Now it's real. And so I think that companies are taking a hard look. So for example, companies that make plastic resin, they are very concerned about the end of life of that plastic product. They're not sure what to do because economically it's not sustainable for them to say, have to buy it back and process it. But they recognize that they need to be part of the conversation and part of the possible technical solutions of that end product. But, the short answer of any like specific measures, I'm just not familiar with. I'm sorry.
Okay, so with that, I think we will say thank you to Dr.
Well,
Marco
thank you
Castaldi.
very much. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks.
And I'm going to scoot forward here. Thank you to all of you for coming this evening to our inaugural event here at the Clinton Street Theater. Thank you again to Metro and the Let's Talk Trash program, and thank you to all of you for coming this evening. Have a great evening.